Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Kaleidoscope with Ambika, reflecting on life through its many colours. In this episode, I will be discussing the Conservative Conference and how Badenoch has released the new policy of the UK withdrawing from the ECHR if the Conservatives were to win the next elections. In this episode, I will be discussing its implications, but more importantly, what the ECHR actually entails. So, what does the ECHR actually mean? Well, it's an international treaty of the Council of Europe which is designed to protect and ensure human rights within Europe and the fundamental freedoms in the UK. This treaty was signed by the UK in 1950 and enforced in 1953. But in order for me to understand the implications better, it's important for me to reflect upon what the ECHR has done for us as the UK so far. Well, because the UK was one of the founding members of this treaty, the ECHR has been very impactful on UK policies and laws put in place. For example, the ECHR has impacted the way in which we treat people of different groups, whether that be people of different sexualities, as well as how corporal punishment has been utilised in schools and the way in which it has now been illegalised. So why is the ECHR very important for us? Well, with my very limited research and understanding, I've come to the idea that the ECHR has acted as international regulation for the ethics of different countries and their policies in the way that their policies impact and treat different groups. For example, because of the ECHR, corporal punishment was, as I previously said, legalised in school. And this is very important because it allows the different countries and the governments of different countries to reflect upon their own policies and to ensure that their policies do, to a certain extent, remain ethical in order to protect the rights of different individuals. Because of the ECHR, this has also meant that the UK government, especially at the moment, have had to rely upon the permission of the European Council in Strasbourg when acting upon certain policies. For example, with the Conservatives' previous policy of the stop the boats and the increased deportations of immigrants to Rwanda, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg was the one who prevented the Conservatives from going through with this. And because of this, the ECHR has ensured that certain groups who are more subject to marginalisation and discrimination are protected against these, especially as shown with the 2024 Stop the Boats campaign. The protection of immigrants was even more important and vital, and the ECHR ensured that the British government abided by the legal ethics of this. So why would leaving the ECHR have such a great impact on us then? Well, only 46% of all Britons actually agree with Badenoch's new policy of wanting to withdraw from the ECHR. And I am with those that do not agree with this policy, because I believe that if we withdraw the UK from the ECHR, we lose accountability, or the UK government lose its international accountability to an extent in regards to its policies. So, for example, if the UK hadn't been part of the ECHR in 2024 with the Stop the Boats Conservative campaign, potentially there could have been the allowing of more deportations into Rwanda, which would undermine the human rights of individuals. Therefore, the UK government would have failed the basic human rights of safety, of the right to seek asylum, etc., to those who were deeply affected and to those immigrants. And if the UK did so, then perhaps this would act as a negative precedent and encourage other countries to potentially do the same, to withdraw themselves from the ECHR. This could potentially mean that the treaty would lose its international power and therefore have less of a say in the regards to making different governments and different authorities accountable for their actions. And if that were the case, then perhaps there would be greater worry globally in regards to there being less protection for human rights, for example. But why would the Conservatives and the 46% of Britons who were in favour of Badenoch's new policy agree to leave the ECHR? Surely for them there must be some benefit. Well, according to Badenoch and others, it's because of the ECHR that there was a reduction in the levels of deportation of migrants, with the Rwanda case, for example. And perhaps this would provide the UK with or at least the UK government with greater flexibility in their policies, which for the Conservatives may be seen as beneficial for those 46% of Britons, because this may allow them to feel a greater sense of autonomy, for example, in regards to their policies and the way that they can ensure that matters are followed up by in the UK. However, the implications, in my opinion, from my research, are not only those of ethical implications, but also in the more pragmatic perspective. For example, for those who are business owners, the UK's withdrawal could be a cause for greater precarity, because this could lead to an increase in taxation levels and inflation, which is not only bad enough as it is on their own as isolated instances, but in the context of the continued cost of living crisis, this would have a continued bad effect and impact on those individuals, and therefore this would leave the UK in a socially and politically less stable condition. So not only ethically, one could argue that the withdrawing from the ECHR is a bad decision or a bad policy, but also in a more pragmatic sense too. So what could be the alternatives? Well, there have already been 16 protocol changes made to the ECHR, and because the UK is one of its founding members and one of its founding charters, perhaps if the UK does have particular concerns regarding different policies or the way that the ECHR regulates certain aspects, the UK could use its position as one of the founding members to advocate for more adjustments, because if 16 adjustments have been made to protocols in the past, perhaps it would be likely that another adjustment could be made. And perhaps the UK government could argue this from inside without losing their own foot in international power. Because if they do choose to withdraw from the ECHR, if the Conservatives were to win the next elections, then not only would this have an impact on the UK's ethics and wider ethics and pragmatic circumstances, but also it would mean that the UK would lose its power, or it would have a diminishing power in international say in regards to the ECHR and other European situations as well. So this is what I have thought, and this is all dependent upon my very limited understanding of research, but I'd be extremely interested to know, what do you think? Are you agreeing with Badenoch, or are you more alongside what I'm thinking? Regardless, please do share your comments, and I'm more than happy to be educated more on this matter, because this is the whole point of me starting this podcast, so that I can continue to grow and to learn more. And I hope that you've enjoyed this first episode. So please do like, share, subscribe, and feel free to comment your own opinions. Thank you for listening.